Geek Therapy Radio.
Welcome to the Geek Therapy Radio podcast. I'm your mental curator, Johnny Hemberger. Curator, just showing you around this museum of the mind. And right now, what's on top of my mind, real quick, before I get onto that, the meat and potatoes of this podcast is just going to be commentary on what's going on in the world right now. And hopefully it leaves you a little bit. It's to inspire some confidence, ease some fears, possibly give you a little bit of hope, maybe thinking about things in a little bit of a different way. I'm going to attempt to leave you feeling a little bit better in these trying times. I sound like a commercial. Every commercial on TV right now. We know here at Fort that times are trying. Trying times. Things are tough right now. So anyways, I just want to talk to that point a little bit, just kind of ease your minds a little bit, or just at least express my opinions on things if you care to stick around. But first, before I crack the mic here for the podcast, I started to download some games on Steam. There's a Steam sale going on right now, unfortunately, for my wallet. Actually, it's a good thing. You know what? Really, it's a good thing. I don't buy too many video games, especially when they are, to me, so expensive, $60, and I'm so afraid that I'm just not going to play the game very much, that I'm going to spend $60 on a video game and then just barely play it. I have a Steam library, dozens and dozens and dozens of games, probably 100 games easy. Oh, absolutely 100 games easy, probably closer to 200 games. But what games do I play? Out of all the hundreds of dollars, if not thousands, I've spent over time on my Steam library, what games do I play? Rocket League, and sometimes Street Fighter. I play maybe a handful of games, and I know there's a ton of you listening right now with Steam libraries that are just bursting at the seams. You spent all this money on games, and then you just wind up playing one or two of them. I definitely fall in that category. But I'm downloading some games right now. Project Cars 2 was on sale for like $10 or $7 or something like that, so I got Project Cars 2. Payday 2 is 99 cents right now. These are not brand new games. What is it? Just Cause 4 was on sale for $10 or $12. So I picked up a few games. Total out the door price was $28. They have this $5 discount if you spend $30. So if you spend $30, it goes down to $25. And that's basically what I did. Plus tax out the door, $28 and some odd cents. And I can only, again, speak for here in the United States. But as I'm downloading these games, I know games are huge. I know they're huge nowadays. You know, I'm re-downloading Final Fantasy 13. I still like Final Fantasy 13, and it's 49 gigs. Just Cause, let me pull the mic over here. Oops, sorry about that. Let me pull the mic over here to see what Just Cause is. Just Cause 4, 62 gigabytes. Final Fantasy 13, 49 gigabytes. Project Cars 2 is downloading right now. It's 38-ish, 39 gigabytes. Huge games. I'm going to move the mic over, and I might actually mute this for a second. Hold on one moment. So games are huge. There are games out there that are closer to, if not over, 100 gigabytes in size. So it's no mystery. It's no surprise these days that games are so huge. So just for kicks and giggles, I loaded up Super Mario Brothers into my NES emulator. I like to use Mesen, M-E-S-E-N. And the ROM for Super Mario Brothers is 41 kilobytes. Now, there may be different versions of the ROM out there, but they're going to be around 41 kilobytes, under 50 kilobytes easy for Super Mario Brothers. That's the size of the game. And I've heard that if you save a screenshot of the game, and of course this completely depends on resolution, that if you save a screenshot of the game just as a JPG, that it will be bigger than the game itself. So I did that. And what I came up with is this. The game is 41 kilobytes. The screenshot, I was playing at 1080, so 1920 by 1080. So that was the size of the screenshot. I know that if I reduce resolution, it would have reduced the file size of the JPG. So I took a screenshot, loaded it right into Paint, and just saved it as a straight up JPG. Didn't change any settings, no nothing. Just saved a screenshot at 1080p of Super Mario Brothers, the original Super Mario Brothers on NES, a 41 kilobyte ROM, and the JPG is 260 kilobytes size on disk. 260 kilobytes. That's how many times? 260 divided by, let's just do some real math. Maybe you know in your head right now, you could do quick math like that. Divided by 41 equals 6.3 times the size of the ROM itself. That being said, Super Mario Bros. 3, the ROM for Super Mario Bros. 3 is 385 kilobytes in size. So in that case, if I took a screenshot of Super Mario Bros. 3, well, there's different compressions of JPGs, and yes, it can matter with color and grading and all sorts of things can factor into the file size, but the actual JPEG of Super Mario Bros. 3 in the same resolution would be smaller than the game itself in that case, but not by much. Super Mario Bros. 3, what did I say? 385 kilobytes? Yeah, 385 kilobytes, thereabouts. And the JPEG for Super Mario Brothers was 260 kilobytes. So that just goes to show you. It's just funny. Super Mario Brothers 1, using that as an example, taking a screenshot of Super Mario Brothers 1. The screenshot was 6.3 times bigger than the game itself, than the total game itself. That's just wild to think about. It's just fascinating and geeky to think about how far we've come in sizes of games. And now in 1985, 86, whenever the first Super Mario Brothers came out, if you said it was 41 kilobytes, that would have been mind-blowing at the time. That would have been crazy at the time. You got to think about people with their Commodore 64s with 64 total kilobytes of RAM in there, and we're not going to get into the semantics of how it's divvied up 32 or the different ROM chips in there, RAM and ROM and whatever. But if somebody with a Commodore 64 is seeing somebody playing a game that is 128 kilobytes, possibly. Kilobytes, all I'm getting at here is that was a unit of measurement. That's what we used back in the 80s. And now we're talking about terabytes right now. Gigabytes and terabytes are the standard units of measurement right now, possibly megabytes still. But back in the day, it was kilobytes. And if you put an M in front of and made megabytes, if you were talking about megabytes in the early 80s, it was unheard of. Talking about megabytes in the 1980s would be like talking about petabytes here in 2020. It's just crazy to think of how far we've come. To think that you can store a terabyte, a micro SD. There's micro SD cards out right now, or soon to be, that are a terabyte in size. Micro SD cards, a terabyte in size. That's your pinky nail. Look at your pinky nail. That's a terabyte. If you would have told somebody in 1983, clacking away on their Commodore 64, that you could hold a terabyte of information on your pinky, on your fingernail, they would think you were crazy. Although they would have believed it. I think they would have been so crazy and far-fetched, but any of the technically minded back then, if you were to talk to a computer scientist back then and say, one day we'll have a terabyte on our pinky, a computer scientist in the 80s would probably say, yeah, that sounds about right. Moore's Law and where we're going, and the uptick in storage technology and solid state technology, and it sounds far-fetched now, but yeah, I can totally see how we're up to a terabyte of storage on the size of your pinky nail in 2020. But if you're talking to a little geek like me playing Mario Brothers in 1985 or the late 80s and say, we're going to have a terabyte, I would have been like, what is a terabyte? I'm not even thinking about what storage sizes are. All I know is I put the gray thing in the other gray thing and I'm playing Mario. So anyways, we can reminisce about 80s video games and file sizes and storage formats all day long. I've talked about different storage formats on Geek Therapy Radio many, many times in many, many past episodes. Holographic storage, that's very fascinating. What is Microsoft working on? Or is it Intel or Microsoft? One of them is working on storage on glass, actual holographic storage. Is it called Microsoft? Oh gosh, it's going to bug me now. Project Silica by Microsoft. I'm sorry, it was going to bug me. I've talked about it many times on Geek Therapy Radio. Project Silica by Microsoft. Anyways, I want to move on a little bit to one more stop before we get to the meat and potatoes of this show. And that is, on the previous podcast, I speculated, and just, it was a fancy of my mind, that maybe on the path to, speaking of Apple and Apple's going to its own silicon and system on chips, that I postulated that possibly could we see over the next 2 years in this transitional period, would we see products like the Mac Pro use AMD processors before they go to their own Apple silicon on products like the Mac Pro, the big daddy. So the multiple 32 core, 64 core, whatever's big beast computers that are still going to rely on x86. The transition to Apple SoCs, would we make an AMD stop in between? So the more I thought about it, and Anderson, thank you for confirming this on Twitter. Anderson, if you've seen him on Twitter, if you've seen him replying to me on Twitter, maybe you follow me on Twitter and you don't really respond much, but you see what's going on. That's what Twitter is, basically. You don't have to respond to anything, but you see what's going on. Anderson is a really good check valve for me. I know that if I say something or I speculate on something that really begs a different point of view or a different opinion or some more input, I know that Anderson is going to be the one to let me know about it. So anyways, that is that. What did he say? Anderson, I'm gonna put you on blast right now. I'm gonna open up your tweet and do you justice verbatim with what you said to me in regards to Apple making an AMD stop before going to full Apple SoCs. He said here, let's see, and he says, okay, and no, Apple won't adopt AMD CPUs at all, especially now with their own stuff. Just forget them. Will do. And it makes sense. The more I think about it, it does make sense. What would be the point? What would be the point? If the whole goal is to get onto your own in-house silicon, why would you gum things up by talking to motherboard manufacturers and getting Apple to sign off on AMD motherboards and socket AM4 and socket TR4 or whatever new socket's coming out to put in your Mac Pro before going to your own Apple SoC? That seems like such a headache, and 2 years is no time at all to do it. Really, there's all sorts of logistical reasons and financial reasons and just reasons why Apple wouldn't make any sort of pit stop at AMD on the way to Apple SoCs. They're going to stick with Intel as far as x86 products are concerned until they replace Intel x86 altogether with their own Apple ARM SoCs. That makes total sense. But that's why we speculate on things. That's why it's fun just to think about things, especially in Geek Therapy Radio. That's part of the geek therapy, is just speculating on things. And it's really cool. I think it feels neat. To me, I don't know what this says about me or what kind of how psychologically revealing this is. But to get meta for a moment, when I was talking about AMD, that Apple might make a pit stop with AMD on the way to Apple SoCs, especially in their higher end products, their workstation products. At the time, it felt like, yeah, that makes total sense. And then afterwards, thinking about it and then reading Anderson's tweet, I was like, yeah, it makes total sense that they wouldn't do it. And it feels good to kind of come to that conclusion too. It feels good in a way, in my heart and my mind, to be wrong correctly, if that makes sense. That part of science and part of being a geek and part of questioning your world and your universe is that sometimes you're delighted to be wrong because it always feels better to have things make more sense. It felt good to speculate. Maybe we'll go to AMD at some interim point between Intel and Apple SoCs. AMD makes sense. It felt good to think it. Felt good to say it. But it feels good to be wrong also, because it makes total sense. We're just gonna skip the AMD step. It makes no sense to go to AMD. being concrete feels good, if that makes any sense. Like having a good foundation in reality and coming to a conclusion, whether you came to it yourself or somebody pointed it out to you, at least in my mind, feels good. I guess it's the psychological and mental equivalent of when you were a kid and you figured out that the star shape block fits in the star shape hole of that sphere. Or that when you pick up the circle shape, it fits perfectly through the circle shape receptacle on that sphere. It makes sense. It feels good. It feels like clicking down a Lego piece perfectly into place. You're kind of hunting and searching and coming to your own conclusions and speculating and speculations and just running through all the possible options in your mind. And then whether you come to it of your own volition or somebody else points it out to you, an answer that makes better sense, it feels good. Oh, yeah, my reasoning wasn't very solid in how I was thinking the other day. This makes much more sense. And on the very minor scale of things, it makes much more sense that Apple would not make a pit stop with AMD processors on their way to Apple SoC ARM-based processors. Makes total sense. It fits better. It fits the mold better. It fits the worldview better. It just makes more sense. It's like the universe is in order when you come to that, a conclusion as small as that. Path of least resistance type of conclusion. And the path of least resistance for Apple is just going to be bye-bye Intel, hello Apple SoCs without introducing an extra step in between. Makes total sense. That's a really good segue, I think, to the meat and potatoes of this podcast. Normally, I wouldn't speak so succinctly on coronavirus, COVID-19, masks, wearing masks, the state of the world right now, what's going on. But my encouragement, and the way I'll start this off is, I wish more people felt good about being corrected with conclusions that make sense, that make better sense. So with masks, I'm going to speak about masks just for a moment. And I can only speak about what's going on in the United States, and I'll preface this way. There's been a spike of cases in the United States, for sure. Absolutely, you can see the data. You can see that after May, that throughout June, cases have skyrocketed in the United States, that we were flattening the curve along with the rest of the world. We were following the trends with the rest of the world. We had it under control. In the United States on May 25th, George Floyd was murdered. And we've had demonstrations and rallies and protests and, yes, some riots. Since then, people out in the streets trading sweat and spit with each other and blood and God knows what else with each other out in the streets. So, yes, you see, while we flattened the curve and we were following the trend with the rest of the world, doing good, George Floyd was murdered. People are out in the streets protesting, as they should. But we are spreading coronavirus again. It's not just single-handedly. The only reason coronavirus is spiking in the country right now is not just because people feel that masks are some sort of tyranny. That's part of it for sure. And we'll talk about that. That's going to be the meat and potatoes of what I'm talking about here. That masks are not tyranny. But you have to look at all the data. Increase in protests, increase of people out in the streets giving the virus to each other, and then going out their merry way into the communities. They're spreading it through protests. So that's just one point of data right there, that the fact that protests are happening in the streets, that is one way. That's where we saw the first uptick in spread of the coronavirus after getting a hold of it along with the rest of the world. What's causing the increases in spread? It's kind of it's a two-fisted sucker punch. Protests and then compounded by this idea that masks don't help and masks are infringement of your rights and masks are tyranny and it's government control and all this rabble. So you have the sucker punch of protests and ignorance all combining. I mean, I guess it's all part and parcel, all part of itself. You can call racism ignorance. Racism is ignorance. Ignorance is racism. And that's one reason why we have the protest, compounded by the ignorance about what masks do and don't do and what they are and are not about. So let's just talk about about face coverings specifically. Because that's the masks. When people say mask and they're referring to wearing masks and we're pissed off about masks, we're talking about face coverings, just some cloth over your face. Now, the biggest point of ignorance that you'll hear, that I've heard, and that you will hear people spouting off about, and if I may be so blunt, if just one observation I've made is that the people that are most anti-mask and most conspiratorial about masks and most rah, I'm not going to wear a mask, is a demographic that is at most risk, if you catch my drift. The amount of elderly people that I've heard, I'm 82 years old, and if I get coronavirus, I'm not wearing a mask because if I get coronavirus now, something's going to get me and I'm not going to live my life in fear. First of all, that's selfish. See, I don't even want to call it that. It's just ignorance. It's not about you. I myself am not worried about getting coronavirus. If I was 95 years old, I probably also would not be worried about myself getting coronavirus. I'd be thinking, I'm 95 years old, something's going to get me sooner or later. I'm just not worried about getting it. But that's the thing. That's the rhetoric you will hear. That's the mantra you will hear from a lot of people, is that I'm not worried about getting it. It's not that deadly. I won't. So a lot of people have got it in past and never knew they had it. They got the virus. They never showed symptoms. Asymptomatic spread. Blah blah blah. It's not that dangerous. Meanwhile, 200,000 people are dying of compromised immune systems. The vast majority, yes, I will give you that. Most of them are people that already have compromised immune systems, that are very old or have established ailments already. You don't hear about too many 25-year-old young men and women in the prime of their life dying from coronavirus. There are some. There's a very small little tiny percentage in there. But the vast majority of people dying of coronavirus are elderly, and they are at increased risk already. But back to the point, you can say that you are not afraid of getting coronavirus, and that's true. A lot of people are not afraid of getting coronavirus. I am not afraid. I'm telling you right now, host of Geek Therapy Radio, I am not personally afraid of getting coronavirus because I'm not in that most at-risk target. Do I target the demographic? It's not a target, but that demographic, you know what I mean. I don't want coronavirus. I would prefer not to have coronavirus. Coronavirus, from what we understand right now, depending on the severity of it, does lifelong damage to your lungs and other systems of your body. You don't want coronavirus. Just because I know that I would survive coronavirus, or I have a 99.9% odds of surviving coronavirus, doesn't mean I want it. Doesn't mean I want the flu. The last flu that I had, I was begging God to either heal me or kill me. Make a decision right here, right now. God, please, either just drive a meteor through my brain and end it, or please cure me right now. Because this sucks. 2 or 3 days of feeling like death. What do they say about seasickness? The first 20 minutes, you're hoping you don't die. And then the next 20 minutes, you're hoping that you do. It's kind of funny. I don't want coronavirus, even though I know that I would survive it, and I'm not. Well, I have a pretty good understanding that I'm at increased odds of surviving it, being my age and of my health. But that's not the point. That's all I'm getting at here. It's not the point of you not being afraid of getting coronavirus. You're 95 years old. Something's going to get me. I'm not afraid of coronavirus. I'm not going to wear a mask because I don't care if I get coronavirus. It's not about you. 2 things. 1, that's not how masks work. And that's my main point in all of this, is just the ignorance about what those cloths are. You think putting a shirt around your face is going to keep you from getting coronavirus? You're stupid. You're a government shill. You're just listening to the government. Bad government. Government. It's tyranny, I tell you. It's tyranny. It's ignorance. Ignorance. That's not how face coverings work, because it's not about you. And that's the most difficult concept to grasp nowadays, especially, I can only speak for Americans. It's not about you. It's not about me. The reason why I think we Americans are having such a problem with coronavirus right now, even though we were doing good up until a month ago, having such a big problem with this, is that it's hard for a lot of us to conceptualize this idea that it's not about us as an individual. That the reason why you wear a face mask is not to protect you, it's to protect your neighbor. And why is that such a foreign concept? Wearing a mask is not about protecting you at a grocery store, it's about protecting all the other customers at that grocery store. And if we'd all just protect each other, we could get through this faster. I don't hate people who don't understand how masks work. I don't hate people who are self-absorbed. They just don't know any better. Most of them don't just don't know any better. Some of them, I'll be frank, and I'm going to cuss here a little bit, are just assholes who are self-absorbed with themselves. But I don't hate any of them either. Like so many other things in life, education is what is so critical, and education is what's missing. It's funny, like I mentioned a few minutes ago, that when you have the correct information, you come to conclusions that fit better. If you apply the scientific method to different areas of your life, you come to conclusions that fit better. You come to working theories from hypotheses that all just works better and fits better. That if we were all just educated, if the person thinking, I'm not afraid about getting coronavirus, it's two things you need to switch in your brain. One, it's not about you, it's about your neighbor. Two, that's not how masks work. Just a little bit of education. And for anyone listening to this right now that doesn't know how masks work, they work like this. And I'm just talking about face coverings, not doctor's masks, not respirators, nothing like that. Just putting a handkerchief over your face. It's the same reason you use tissues. It's the same reasons why, even way before coronavirus, most of my life, anytime I've sneezed, I've ducked my head into my shirt to put my nose and mouth below my collar of my shirt. It's just so you catch most of what's coming out. That's the whole point of face masks. It's just to catch all the spit and sputum and crap and saliva coming out of your mouth when you talk, when you're sneezing, when you're spitting, when you're coughing, and just when you're breathing. That's why you cover your nose too. It's just to catch all the big stuff coming out of your mouth. Does that completely eliminate the spread of coronavirus? No, it does not. But it dramatically reduces it. And that's the whole point. So that's the education for anybody who needed it on how masks work, on how face coverings work. Let me be more specific. When you go to the grocery store and they ask you to cover your face, it's just a face covering. They're not asking you to put on a scuba apparatus. It's just put some cloth over your mouth and your nose. Well, that's not going to protect me from coronavirus, so I don't even care about that. It's not to protect you. It's to protect everybody else from you. And then if everybody else wears it, you're protected from them. That's how it works. It's a hard concept right now in the United States to think about anybody outside of ourselves. I get that. That's just ignorance. I'm sorry if I'm being too spicy here, but that's just the way it is. And again, I don't hate the person who's just ignorant about these things. How could I hate that person? I just want them to be educated because I want myself to be educated. If I'm coming to the wrong conclusions, I hope that there's more people in the world like Anderson that tap you on the shoulder and say, hey, think about it this way. Oh, yeah. Oh, that works so much better. And that's always been what Geek Therapy's radio's been about. That's always been the call to the audience, that if you know something, think about it a little bit different way than I do, because most of the time it's just me. Sometimes I might have Clint from LGR or David, the 8-bit guy, or I'm working on getting a Retro Man Cave on here too. Doesn't matter that it's mostly me. Even if I have a guest on, whatever, I can be fact checked. I implore you to fact check me. I wish more people would walk around this world willing to be wrong. Matter of fact, hoping to be wrong. That someone would have the courage to say, you know what you said the other day? That's complete BS, and let me tell you why. If we had a little bit more of that kind of bravery. People confuse bravery with hatred, I think, a lot of times. I'm being brave because I'm hating people. I'm being brave because I'm a divider. Sometimes being brave is a unifier. Sometimes being brave is being the person who's brave enough to correct people out of love with the correct information. or at least out of love with a different point of view. If the goal of humanity is to come to the best conclusion, why wouldn't we try to help each other out by offering different points of view? But if it's coming from a point of hatred and division, that doesn't work. If I'm picturing a 65-year-old white guy from Louisiana or Texas or even New York City or Boston thinking that they don't want the government tyranny of wearing a mask and they're not going to wear a mask just because the government told them to do so, I don't hate that person. I just want them to think about it in a little bit different way. Think outside their 3-foot bubble for a moment, just for a moment. Can we just for a second listen to scientists for a moment? We've listened to everybody else. We've listened to anybody else confirming your bias, your confirmation bias. Can we just listen to a scientist for a second? Because it doesn't lie. And I'm not saying that scientists can't lie. Don't misquote me there. But there's a comfort in the fact that 1 + 1 = 2. That 1 + 1 plus X equals whatever you want it to. And I think that's the equation that a lot of people use today is we don't use 1 + 1 = 2. We go by 1 + 1, but what if also plus X and then equals N? There's the problem. You start interjecting all this nonsense into the equation you can come to any answer you want to. What did I see somewhere? It was like a meme or a comic or something like that. It's like, you are not researching your conspiracy, you're shopping for conclusions. Something like that. You're shopping for confirmation of your conclusions. That's it. You're not researching your conspiracy, you're shopping for confirmation of your conclusions, which is a totally different thing. I just wish there was a little bit more understanding. And so, out in the world, and so I'll start wrapping it up with this. I still have to record the broadcast tonight. I'll go back to something that my dad told me years ago before he died. I forget what the country was going through at the time. This is 10, 20 years ago. It was some sort of tumultuous time in the country. Maybe we were just going back to Afghanistan. Maybe it was after 9/11 for sure. My dad, everyone who listens to this know, my dad served in Vietnam. He has his opinions on government and Uncle Sam and politics and everything like that. And I've seen him go both ways politically in his lifetime. But there's one foundation to it all, and the only concept he put in my mind politically in regards to my country and my countrymen, Americans, he said that Americans are resilient. That when we go through a tough time, throughout history, Americans have proven to be resilient. That's all his quote was. That's all he would tell me. Americans are resilient. It was basically to ease fear. Say, we'll get through this because we've been through so much already. We were resilient after the Civil War, where we killed half of ourselves, where brother went against brother. We were resilient in World War I. We were resilient in World War II. Hell, Americans were even resilient after Vietnam. Vietnam was the first time that Americans saw what warfare was and questioned the government involvement in warfare, even though technically Vietnam wasn't an actual war. It was a conflict. It was never, we won't get into the history of that. But Americans are resilient. So that the piece I find a lot of the times is in that statement. Americans are resilient. 2020 right now is the biggest test in my life that I can see that Americans have faced since I've been alive. I've been around for 36, almost 37 years. It's not a whole long time. America's been through a lot more before I got here, and will go through a lot more after I'm gone. But I hold on to this idea that we're resilient, that all of us listening to this right now will look back on 2020 in a few years and say, that sucked, but I'm glad we went through it because we learned a lot from it. The riots and protests and rallies And the fact that racism has been brought back to the surface, we got to deal with it now. And it's hard and it's tough, and pandemics and how to deal with pandemics and how to deal with a president that not everybody agrees with this vehemently, that will come out of this and look back to 2020, the early 2020s, and say, it sucked. That was a hard time. I don't like thinking about that time, but at least we learned something from it. That's the American resilience that I adhere to, and that gives me peace. Without getting into the spirituality and my own personal faith, down here on the surface of the earth, rubbing elbows with my neighbor, I have to count on that American resilience. That in the end, that when this is all over with, we'll have learned from it. That we will be resilient enough to learn from it. And that through education and through tapping your neighbor on the shoulder and out of love, offering them a different point of view. Hey, Chuck, I noticed you hate masks and you think it's the government intervening in your life, but you do realize that if we ate the broccoli sooner, we could eat dessert sooner. Pretty simple. But don't say it like a dick like that. Just out of love. Hey, hey Bob, that's not how masks work. It's about protecting the other guy in line at the grocery store that may have a special needs child or a parent in a nursing home that's at risk, and you don't want their kid to die. You don't want their at-risk parent to die. That's all masks are about. It's about protecting that person, because you never know what someone else is going through. We haven't walked in their shoes. So just give them a benefit of a doubt, and let's just try to help each other, man. And then give your neighbor, well, you can't give him a hug right now, but maybe an air fist bump or something, an air high five. Say, we got this. Just think about this a little differently. And we got this. And we'll solve this with love, and we'll be resilient with love. And love will feed the resilience. We've tried the hate. We've tried tearing each other apart. We've tried hating people who don't wear masks. We've tried hating people that look different from us in any way, shape, or form. We've tried it. It doesn't work. It's never worked. Maybe we can try love. Maybe we can try correcting each other and offering other points of view out of love instead of hatred, instead of the superiority complex. I think that's the way forward. You can call me mamby-pamby or an oversimplified view of the world or whatever. I just don't think love is simple. I don't think looking at the world in love is simple. I think the simple way is hatred and anger, honestly. I think compassion and love is the harder way. But I think it's the only way that's going to work. And with that, I'm running out of time here. Just wanted to talk to everybody about that. Know that you're loved. Know that you're worthy of love, both giving and receiving love. And you're worthy of your own self-confidence as well. You really are. Let's try love. Let's try love and science. Let's try encouraging each other through love and science. Wouldn't that be great? Let's try it. That's my challenge to you next time you get on social media and you see things that are terrifying you and scaring you and pissing you off. Maybe approach it in a little bit different way, in a more compassionate way. But maybe try a little bit of that. Maybe we can give that a shot. Anyways, thanks for listening to Geek Therapy Radio Podcast. Stay tuned for the broadcast coming up in the next couple days. I love you all. Thanks for listening. Talk to you later.